In the late 1990s, Asia was collapsing. Banks were pulling credit lines, currencies were in freefall, and in Singapore, most people clung to whatever stability they could find. And yet, in this storm, one man made a move so audacious few could make sense of. He mortgaged his house to start 2 new businesses in 2 years, at the very moment others would simply be cutting back. What followed would put him in rare company, one of the few Singaporeans to build a billion-dollar business. But his story doesn't end there, because he wasn't content with just building a company. He wanted to do more, to build a better Singapore. The battles he fought in business would later echo in Parliament, where he tried to make the system one that more Singaporeans would actually be proud of. This is the story of Inderjit Singh, and why what he fought for still matters for every Singaporean today. Before we begin, welcome to What Makes a Country. I'm Tian Chong, your host, and on this channel, we uncover the hidden architecture behind successful countries. Our focus is on the policies, institutions, and businesses that create lasting, thriving societies. Inderjit's story begins humbly. He grew up in a Malay village near Jalan Eunos, the son of a watchman, the only non-Malay in primary school, Hakit Bukit Primary. He went on to pursue his bachelor's in electrical engineering at Nanyang Technological University (NTU) after stints at Broadrick Secondary and Temasek Junior College. By the mid-1990s, Singh had carved out a stable career at Texas Instruments (TI), learning how the global semiconductor industry ticked. He could have stayed there, slowly climbing up the corporate ladder. But right before the Asian financial crisis erupted in 1997, he launched TriStar Electronics, a distributor of electronic components with his brothers. Banks slammed their doors, investors disappeared. No one wanted to back a startup in a crowded, low-margin industry. But Singh refused to quit. He mortgaged his house and even put down his life savings just to convince one reluctant bank to back him. And it set the stage for what came next. A year later, in 1998, the semiconductor industry was also in crisis. The giants integrated device manufacturers like TI, where Singh had worked, were under siege. Revenues were plunging, factories were bleeding cash. Most analysts assumed the response was obvious. In a downturn, pull production back in-house, tighten control and weather the storm. But Singh saw the cracks forming into something bigger. He believed that the very weakness of the moment would accelerate a different trend: outsourcing. If chipmakers rely more on external partners during bad times, they could actually shield their own factories from collapse. And when the next cycle turned south, in other words, what looked like retrenchment to everyone else looked to Singh like the opening of a floodgate. He founded United Test and Assembly Center, or better known as UTAC, to seize the opportunity. But in Singapore, no one wanted to touch it. Local investors were too cautious and too conservative. Raising the kind of capital he needed looked impossible. So Singh turned abroad, to Taiwan, where he had built relationships during his Texas Instruments years. There, in a single marathon meeting, he walked out with commitments of more than $100 million, one of the largest seed raises ever attempted by a Singaporean, and secured in the middle of a crisis, no less. But even then, he refused to make UTech purely foreign-backed. If this was going to be Singapore's chance to prove it could build a homegrown tech champion, then Singaporeans had to have skin in the game. Singh insisted that 30% of the company's ownership must belong to local Singaporean investors. And so, after being turned away once, he circled back to the very same Singapore financiers who had dismissed him. This time, faced with his Taiwanese war chest, they relented and put in another $38 million. And with more capital raised than he had ever expected, UTech was suddenly equipped to break into the big leagues. Opportunity appeared in the ruins of failure. Micropolis, a disk drive maker, had gone bankrupt. Its liquidators were desperate to offload a massive 400,000 square foot clean room factory. To Singh's team and his investors, the building was cursed. It was twice the size that they needed, twice the cost they had budgeted for, and it carried the backlog of a company that had already failed within its walls. They urged him to simply walk away. But Singh saw the opposite. If they could secure it cheaply, and if this building could jumpstart UTech overnight, no delays, no construction, because it was all ready to go. The decision was made. A single all-cash bid minutes before the deadline was made. Against every prediction, it worked. He won the factory at half price. What others saw as a liability, Singh turned into a launchpad. Within just 2 months, UTech was already profitable. Within 2 years, it had broken the global top 10, the 9th largest in the world, valued at over $2 billion, a unicorn before the word even existed. The company even secured approvals to list on both Nasdaq and the Singapore Exchange. But here's the irony. When Singh first approached SGX, they wouldn't even take the meeting. It was only after Nasdaq gave the green light that Singapore's own exchange came back, asking Singh to do a list. It was a symbolic moment. Global markets recognized what local gatekeepers had dismissed. At a time when Singapore's strategy was still built on courting foreign giants, Singh had shown a homegrown company could stand alongside them. And yet, for Singh, the triumph was bittersweet. Behind the billion-dollar valuation lay hard lessons about control, governance, and just how fragile success can be. When the tech bubble burst in 2002, UTech's much-anticipated IPO was called off. Investors grew nervous, and some wanted to cash out fast. Others pushed to raise even more funds. Singh disagreed. UTech wasn't desperate. It had cash, assets, and a strong management team. There was no need to panic. But not everyone saw it that way. Among the Taiwanese board members, one in particular had his own agenda. He wanted to use UTech as a bargaining chip, offering its share cheaply to his friends, expecting favors back in future deals. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. To Singh, it was unthinkable. Selling shares cheaply would slash the value of his own employees' stake because it would dilute it. The very people who had taken a chance on him from day one. Whereas a few well-connected insiders might walk away with a bargain, but his own team who have helped build UTech from scratch would be shortchanged. For Singh, that was a line he would not cross. But behind his back, the boardroom shifted. The Taiwanese director began to divide and conquer, winning over even some of Singh's most trusted key people. With the Taiwanese bloc holding the majority, Singh suddenly found himself outmaneuvered, and eventually forced out of the very company he had built from scratch. Looking back, Singh admitted he had been too comfortable with his investors. He had raised too much too quickly and given away too much of his equity. If he had raised half the capital first, built value, and gone back for more fundraise, the outcome might have been entirely different. It was a brutal lesson. Building a billion-dollar company was one thing. Holding onto it in the cutthroat world of Asian business alliances was another. When the battles over control began, Singh didn't hold the right cards. Across Asia, many business tycoons learned to thrive in exactly this kind of environment. And in the upcoming conversation, I'll be speaking with Cedric Chin, who has deeply studied how they mastered those struggles for power and survival. You can watch it here. But going back to Singh's story, what makes it so remarkable was that even as he was building TriStar and UTech, and facing all these trials and tribulations, he had already stepped into public service. He became an MP in 1996. He was balancing the weight of not just his company, his young family with 3 kids, and also the demands of representing Ang Mo Kio. Most entrepreneurs would have seen politics as simply a distraction, something that put them away from the business. For Singh, it became another arena to fight the very same battles. Because the problem that Singh had run into, whether it was scarce funding, cautious institutions, or rising costs, weren't just his. They were actually systemic. And in Parliament, he made it his mission to speak for entrepreneurs like him. He knew what it meant to be turned away by banks and agencies, so he pushed for co-investment funds that would put government money alongside private capital to give young founders the backing that he himself had struggled to find. He had seen how Singapore's cautious instincts nearly strangled UTech, so he pressed for global venture funds and angel networks to be welcomed in, rather than kept out. These were the fixes he wished had existed when he was fighting for survival. And when it came to day-to-day business realities, Singh was just as blunt. He warned that rising rents and land costs were squeezing margins for local firms. He pushed back when foreign worker rules were tightened overnight, arguing that smaller companies often needed more time to adjust. He knew from experience how quickly policy or cost shocks could unsettle a business, and he wasn't afraid to say so in Parliament. Underlying all this was a conviction Singh never wavered from. Singapore could not bet its future solely on foreign multinationals. If costs rose and those firms packed up for cheaper shores, what would be left behind? Without nurturing homegrown companies into tomorrow's champions, Singapore could leave itself dangerously exposed. And Singh believed that the hedge was right in front of us. Singapore had the talent, the know-how, and the ambition. What it needed was space for local firms to grow big, to stand alongside the giants and not just serve them. That conviction also explains why, for Singh, the politics itself was never about prestige. It was public service. It was the same instinct that made him insist that UTech keep 30% of its equity in Singaporean hands when fundraising. Growth to him had to serve Singaporeans first, not leave them as bystanders in their own economy. So in 2013, when the government tabled its controversial population white paper, Singh broke ranks. Despite being the deputy party whip at that time, he spoke up for ordinary Singaporeans worried about overcrowding and cohesion. It made him a rare figure in Singapore politics, an insider willing to speak like an outsider. To him, growth at all costs would fracture society, and he called on the government of the day to pause for 5 more years, to fix the strains created by past policy before chasing the next growth trajectory. And this wasn't an isolated stand. Singh's concerns in Parliament always circled back to a deeper conviction that growth had to close divides and not widen them. He was worried that Singapore's systems in education, wages, and even the economy itself were drawing sharper lines between those with opportunity and those who were left behind. That was why he criticized school streaming and the gifted education program system, saying that they branded children too early and hardened class divides. It was why he pushed for stronger wage support schemes, warning that productivity gains had to flow to workers and not just to companies. Across all these debates, his instinct was consistent. Policies had to serve people ultimately. By 2015 though, Singh had stepped away from Parliament. Prime Minister then Lee Hsien Loong wanted him to stay on for another term, 5 more years. But after nearly 2 decades as an MP, he wanted to spend more time with his family and return to building companies and mentoring entrepreneurs. But the very imprint that he left behind as an entrepreneur who carried lessons from his ventures into Parliament, who used that same entrepreneurial mindset to speak bluntly about the trade-offs behind policy and to push for a Singapore that was both pro-growth and inclusive, remains underappreciated in the city's history even till today. Today, in his own capacity, Singh hasn't stopped pushing. He argues that Singapore must rediscover its appetite for risk, starting with manufacturing. In Taiwan and South Korea, manufacturing still makes up around 30% of their GDP. In Singapore, despite the highs that he has reached previously, it has fallen below 20% in recent years. To Singh, that gap is a missed opportunity, because Singapore still has the engineers and technicians, many displaced in recent years, who could anchor a revival. His vision is astute. Singapore could become the prototyping factory of the world, the place where companies take ideas from the lab and turn them into scalable products. For that, he says, Singapore needs a bolder strategy. Manage costs, keep industrial land affordable, and always benchmark ourselves against rivals like South Korea and Taiwan when it comes to manufacturing. Inderjit Singh's story is a reminder of what can be lost when societies becomes really successful. Because their success itself reshapes what risks are taken in the future. He showed how much it takes for one individual to push a system out of equilibrium, to insist that growth serves Singaporeans and that space always be made for risk takers, and that purpose matters as much as numbers itself. And it leaves us with a question Singapore and other successful societies cannot escape from. When success narrows the path before us, who will have the courage to carve out new ones? Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.